Randy Adams is a serial entrepreneur for over 35 years. He's founded 9 venture-backed technology companies, including autonomous vehicle insurance, digital avatars, software publishing, IT, e-commerce, and 2 celebrity-based digital media companies. He's published more than 30 consumer software applications that have collectively sold more than 20 million copies worldwide, raised more than 100 million in venture capital, had 5 successful startup exits return more than $1 billion to investors. He is credited with raising the initial funds for Yahoo, creating the first desktop publishing app for the PC, managing the team that created PDF and Acrobat, and creating the first e-commerce site on the web. Currently, he runs C-level solutions, providing consulting services for early-stage companies. So you're bringing all of that to Bend, and better yet, to PubTalk. My goodness. Welcome to the stage, Managing Partner of C-Level Solutions and Strategic Advisor, Randy Adams.
Well, thank you all very much for coming here tonight and to listen to me, of all people. And I want to thank EDCO and Brian for inviting me. I'm very appreciative. There we go. And so after all this positive talk, I'm going to talk about failure. There's been too positive up to this point, and I think we need to have a little grounding. And I think that's, at least for me, what all these years of starting companies has been. And it kind of grounds you, because when you fail, you're humbled and you learn things. And so what I want to impart tonight is I know the title of the talk is 3 failures, but I was talking to my 18-year-old son, and he said, "Dad, you failed way more times than that. Why are you only doing 3?" And I'm like, I only have so much time. And so, but I did change it to 4 on his behalf. So, so we'll be talking about 4 failures tonight and lessons learned. But I wanted to say, someone asked me tonight, are you a Bendite? And I'm like, I don't know, because I'm from Maine, and unless you're born there, you can't ever say you're from Maine. But my wife and our 3 kids moved here in November, or actually early in the fall of 2019. And I have 2 boys that are going to be going to OSU next year. Have a 13-year-old that's going to be going to Summit. So I'm hoping I'm a Bendite. I sure love it here. It's wonderful, and we're so happy to be here. And I got my California plates off the car, so that's a really way better thing. It helps in the roundabouts, I've found. So the 5 lessons, I have 5 lessons that go along with these failures. And a little bit of background on me. I grew up on an island in Maine called Mount Desert Island. You might have heard of it. Acadia National Park is there. And it was beautiful, but very isolated. Fortunately, I was able to get away, and that's my high school. I was able to get away and get a chance to go to MIT, where I got an engineering degree. And after, well, I found it isn't exactly right on 10, because there were 6 I don't talk about. They were so bad, but I've actually, to be totally honest, I've founded 16 startups, and here's the logos of all of them. Some of you, and it took me a while to find all these logos, because some of them are so old, and I failed way more than I've succeeded. I've actually had 6 successes, not 5, because I'm counting Yahoo now, because I was there at the early stages, and these are the 6, and so I've had 10 failures. So to pick just 4 it's challenging. But I picked 4 that I think I learned the most from, and they're somewhat interesting. Is this going forward? Yeah. Yeah. Let me go back. So here's the 10 failures. And I found myself, after graduating from MIT in Washington, D.C., working for a consulting firm. International consulting firm, Booz Allen and Hamilton. And my job there was and they were all government contracts. They were, quote, beltway bandits, if you were. And I found my job was to go out and find high-tech stuff and then bring it to the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund. We had contracts with all those things. And I found my first company that I really wanted to get involved in that was sort of in the startup mode. And it was a company that had raised $3 million in the penny stock market. And the name of the company, first of all, it's my first fail. So the name of the company was the International Institute of Applied Technology, which should tip anyone with any reasonable mind off that this might be a little bogus. And it was, but what they were doing in that day and age is they were connecting video disc players to Apple II computers and then programming them in such a way that you could create these video experiences, and they were using it for training for the government primarily. And they said to me, hey, you should come and be our general manager. You should work in a small company. And I was working in Booz Allen in Hamilton, and it was huge, and I didn't feel like I had much influence over what was going on, and this was a high-tech startup. At least at the time, it was a high-tech startup. Anymore, it's pretty ancient history. But, so I took the job. Now, what I didn't know about this company was that it had three major problems. The first major problem was that the CTO was spending all the money in his own consulting company, and it wasn't all the development money was going outside. The chief marketing officer had a major drug problem, and the CEO had major alcohol issues. Now, I probably should have done my due diligence, but there was a time when we had our first board meeting, and the CEO had, I think, we were in Washington. The CEO was in New York and had gotten into a fight with a police officer and was, I guess, out of commission, and he'd been released, but out of commission in a suite at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And this is a totally true story. And so the board said, Randy, why don't you be CEO? And the first thing you have to do, and this isn't really the right thing to do to have a new CEO do, but they said you got to fire and get rid of the old CEO, who was 6'5". And I mean, the board should have fired him. But I did. It was a confrontation, and he pushed me up against the wall, and it was nasty. But he left finally. And so I went about sort of redoing the company. I fired the CMO, and I fired the CTO, and I hired new people. And I told the guys over at Booz Allen in Hamilton that I was working there, and they just so happened to be writing a contract for the Postal Service that said that you ought to have some kiosk in the front of every post office. And so I said to them, wouldn't it be great if you had a kiosk that was based on an Apple II and it had a touch panel and it had an optical disc? Could you write that into the RFP? And they said, for you, Randy, we'll write it. Which was really not ethically correct, but anyway, it was back in the day. And so the RFP went out, and EDS and a whole bunch of big major contractors bid on it. And each one of them chose us, our company, as the sub. So no matter who won, we were going to get the contract. And it wasn't a small contract. Our piece was $100 million. And I thought, wow, this is great. But remember, I said it's a public company. And public companies every year have an annual meeting. And in the annual meeting, the shareholders get to vote on the board of directors. And of course, the CEO serves at the mercy, if you will, of the board of directors. And what I didn't realize is when you added up all the shares, the ex-CEO and his buddies had more than I had. So they had the annual meeting, they voted in their board, and I was promptly escorted out. And they said, you're fired. So I got a little depressed. In fact, got a lot depressed because I thought, hey, I've done a good thing. I've worked hard to make this company successful, and yet they kicked me out. And I was angry, and I retreated back to Maine. And I spent the year living off my credit cards. I got a little shaggy. I wrote a little software, but I basically, if you live off your credit cards for too long, you don't have any money anymore. And they repo your car. and then you kind of have to go bankrupt if you have any bills. So I did that. It wasn't particularly fun, but it leads me to lesson number 1, which is never lose control of the cap table or never lose control of the ownership of the company in such a way to make sure that you can outvote everybody if you're the CEO. Otherwise, it'll get taken away from you. And I've advised startups, and I've seen them, and the venture capital people come in, and the A-League people are great, but the D-League people, not so great, and the founders get fired, and it's not particularly fun. So it just so happened this was 1984, and the Macintosh had just come out. And I thought, hey, I know how to program. I can make an IBM PC look like a Macintosh, because there was no Windows at this point in time. So I spent, I don't know, 4 months just doing this, just writing this code and writing this code and writing this code. And I was in Washington, D.C. at the time, because I had gone back and I couldn't live in the woods anymore. And so I cut my hair, and I got this product done that looked like the Macintosh on a PC. And so I reached out to Silicon Valley and some people I knew and said, hey, could you publish this? And they said, oh yeah. They took it to Comdex, which is a big conference at the time. And it was like a big hit. And so they brought me out there, and then we sold the software, and I continued to get royalties on it, and they wrote me a check for $1 million. And I'm like, okay, wait a second. 6 months ago, I was bankrupt, right? And now I have $1 million. I better take good care of that money and not waste it, and I needed to replace the car, so I got conservative about it. I don't know why every time anybody makes money, they buy a car, but it's probably the worst thing you can buy in terms of it's a depreciating asset. Well, at the time, Steve Jobs had just gotten fired from Apple Computer, and he started a company called Next. And there were only 12 people in it, and one of the people that were in it was a programmer friend of mine that I met when I had moved out to Silicon Valley, and he said, you got to come work for Steve. You got to come work for Steve. And I'm like, no, I just want to drive my Ferrari around. I don't want to do any work at all. I'm getting royalty payments, so this is better. And they said, just come talk to us. So I went over to Next, and I talked to the people there, and everybody working there were the people that I had sort of worshipped because they were the people that created the Macintosh. And I had been reading about them in the magazines because I was trying to emulate that product. And so it was pretty special, and I had a meeting with Steve. And he said, what gets you up in the morning and makes you want to do the day? And I say, oh, I fall asleep at night with a technical problem in my head. And in the morning, I have the solution. And he said, welcome to Next, Randy. And then I told him I turned the job down because I just didn't see, it just wasn't, I don't know, I just didn't want to go work, I guess. And then Steve left a message on my answering machine telling me that I was blowing it and I really needed to work at Next and that I was an idiot and it was the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life. I mean, he went on and on and on and on and on. And so, all right, so I joined the company. And then here's the early days. That's me with the weird mustache. And that's Susan Kerr on the left-hand side. She actually created all the fonts and all the icons and the whole look and feel of the Macintosh. And that's Bill Parkhurst on the other side, a brilliant programmer. And it was like there were 12 people there. It was just like Steve was there all the time. Steve would come up in back of me, and he would like look over my shoulder when I'm coding. And so it drove me nuts because I don't know if you've ever been involved in something and somebody looks over your shoulder and they see what you're doing. And you're like, oh, my. So I put this little meter up, and it said Randy's productivity on it, and it had an arrow. And I put it up kind of like quite productive. And then every time Steve would come up, I'd be like, it sucks. And then and he stopped. He stopped after a while. And this is what that computer looked like. The design was interesting. It had no hard disk. It had for storage an optical disk. Now, an optical disk at the time was pretty cool because bit for bit, price per storage was extremely low for optical disk. And this was a read-write optical disk as opposed to the video disk, which I showed you before. The other thing it had, though, was very, very slow seek times and very slow data transfer times. And the software people had chosen to use I don't want to get too technical, but a Unix derivative, which is a multi-processing system, and when one program isn't in it, it throws the other program off to disk, which is the way it enables you to process more than one thing at once. However, this was the slowest disk ever, and it does a lot of this is called swapping. It does a lot of swapping. And so I sat in an engineering meeting, and with 10 people, Steve was running it, and I said, Steve, this is just going to thrash itself to death. This is going to be the slowest machine ever. And then, of course, he said, hey, who agrees with Randy that our design is wrong? And all the engineers were like, nobody agreed. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, I'm out of here. This is not going to work. This first version is going to fail. And so I started a company called Emerald City Software, which was basically desktop publishing. And I sold it after about a year and a half to Adobe. And I ended up running engineering for Adobe. I had 200 people working for me. It was the worst job I ever had in my life. It was meetings. And I don't know if you like sitting in meetings, but this was 100% meetings. And the only fun we had was one time the CEO came up to me, John Warnock, and he said, we need to save trees. And I'm like, okay, John, what would you like me to do about that? And he's like, you need to create artificial paper. And I'm like, okay, is that it? You got anything else beside that? Nope, just got to create artificial paper. So I got three engineers together, and I said, we have to create something that people can use instead of paper to pass around. And so in about a month and a half, we had really 80% of what is PDF and Acrobat today, which at the time we thought, yeah, okay, he's crazy, he wants to replace paper. Now, if we were smart about it, we would have said, we want 1/100% every time someone has a PDF document. So that was going well, and then Steve called me again, and he's like, Randy, right, we fixed it now. Now come start a software company for Next, which leads me to my next fail, because I did. I quit Adobe, and I started a software company for Next. It was called AppSoft. Our competitors called it Crapsoft, which wasn't very nice. It's the truth. And we went to Sequoia Capital, and I got $2 million from Mike Moritz at Sequoia Capital, and we built these products for the Next machine. And in those days, you shipped software because they were in boxes. You had the physical thing you had to move around. So we had a lot of software produced. And then one night in November, Steve said, Randy, call me at night. Randy, I decided not to stop making Next hardware. And I knew it was over. We weren't going to be successful in selling that. So I called up Mike. We gave some money back. We didn't have much left, but we gave some back to Sequoia. And that leads me to lesson number 2, which is never base your business on an unproven platform that you don't control. Like if someone comes out with something new, you say, oh, I'm going to do something as a add-on to that. Or someone comes up with a new piece of hardware and it's not the number one in the market and you don't control it and it goes away. But I was left with a ton of inventory. And I was thinking, like, how do I get rid of this stuff? And at the day, the web didn't exist. And so there was something called Usenet. Usenet was a network that was a derivative of ARPANET, which was developed by the government, that connected people all around the world, that connected computers all around the world, that you actually posted stuff. So I'm like, I think I can sell this stuff on Usenet. So I posted it, and I liquidated $250,000 worth of inventory on Usenet electronically. And I was thinking, like, damn, you can sell stuff online. This is pretty cool. And then 3 months later, Mark Andreessen released the first web browser called Mosaic, running on I think Sun Microsystems primarily. And I said, damn, I'm going to start an e-commerce site. And so I went down, I said, what will people who are early adopters of the web want to buy? And they're all nerds, they're going to buy software and hardware, right? So I went down to Ingram Micro in LA, and I said, I want to sell your stuff on the internet. And they're like, yeah, see ya. So then I went back, and I got another sales guy, and I said, do you have an electronic copy of your catalog? And they said, yeah. I said, could you send it to me on a disk or something? They said, yeah. I said, if I give you an address to drop ship something to, will you drop ship it? And they're like, yeah, we'll do that. I'm like, cool, send me your catalog. And so we created the Internet Shopping Network, which was really the first e-commerce site. And the person that helped me program it was Mark Andreessen, because he hadn't even joined Netscape at the time. And it was pretty cool. We went to the first internet world, and we were approached by the Home Shopping Network, and they bought the company. It was only 3 months old. And, you know, the only thing about that was, and this is their logo, it's fun here. The only thing about that was, this is my boss. That's Barry Diller. He's not the nicest guy in the world. And so I spent the next 3 years trying to escape that company and stop working for Barry. And Barry took a big interest in the internet, and as you know, he owns Tinder, and he owns a whole bunch of other properties now. So lesson number 3 is, when somebody buys your company, think about how fun it will be to work there, or plot your exit as quickly as possible. The good news about this, and the fun part about it, was that when we were really the first e-commerce M&A activity, or any of the web activity, really. So these 2 guys came to me and had lunch with me one day, and they said, Netscape's offered to buy us for $1 million. And I said, you know what, why don't you talk to venture capitalists? And they said, we don't trust venture capitalists. And I'm like, I just lost $2 million of Mike Moritz's money, and he still talks to me, and he's very friendly. And they said, okay, we'll go talk to him. So the 4 of us sat in a room, and Jerry and David and Mike and I, and Mike said, I'll give you $1 million for 20% of your company. And they said, well, that sounds like a much better deal. We'll take that deal. And that investment turned out to be worth, depending on when you exited, between 30 and $60 billion. It was one of the best investments. And they offered me an opportunity to co-invest, and I turned it down, which is probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. But that wasn't a fail. The next fail is one which my wife and I were sitting around with a whole bunch. I'm an early adopter, so I have probably every gadget you could possibly have sitting in my garage that I never use anymore. And we're like, let's sell it on eBay. So we tried to take a picture of it and list it, and it was like, oh, this is so much work. You should just be able to take it down and drop it somewhere, and someone lists it, take 20%. So we created a company called Auction Drop. You drop it off, we sell it on eBay, was our trademark. And everybody thought it was like the first mile of eBay, and everybody thought it was such a great idea. We had a board like you couldn't believe. We had Tim Draper on our board. We had Heidi Roizen on our board, a big venture capitalist now. We had the CEO of Macy's on our board. We had Ron Johnson, who invented the Apple Store, on our board. And we had Jerry Gramaglia, who was the COO at E-Trade, on our board. And we created 5 stores in the Bay Area that you could take stuff and drop it off, and we'd sell it for you on eBay. This was Ron Johnson's store. You see how sort of austere it is, and sort of Apple Store-esque in a sense. Anyway, they're all profitable. And we thought, oh my gosh, we've got 5 stores that are profitable. How do we scale this? And I was thinking, like, well, we can't have, what we did at the stores, truck came by, we picked it all up, took it to a processing center that we had built and processed it all, listed it on eBay, and sold it. I said, well, we can't really do that all across the country, so let's just figure out how we can take a brick and mortar operation and collect items that people want to sell. So we went down to LA and we talked to people that run the UPS store, and they said, absolutely yes, we can turn every one of our UPS stores, 3,700 of them, into drop-off things for Auction Drop. And we don't want to take a piece of the action, we'll just take the shipping to ship it to you. And so we said, oh, okay. So I went to SoftBank, and they gave us $12 million to build this whole thing out. And so we built this processing plant. We figure each of the stores that we had in the Bay Area, that was doing maybe 100 items a day. We're going to turn on 3,700 stores. Stupid Randy thinks he can turn on 3,700 stores all at once. Well, we basically got enough processing power to be able to do that. And then we trained all the stores. We put billboard advertising in all the major metros. We had stickers for the windows of the UPS store. They rolled the thing out. And after we did that with those 3,700 stores, our items per day only increased 400 total. Yeah, that's what I said, oh. And the board said more than oh. And so I'm trying to figure, like, why is this happening? So I flew around to all these UPS stores, like, why aren't you adopting this program? And they said, look, we used to be mailboxes, et cetera. They bought us, they make us do all this stuff we don't want to do. We're not doing it anymore. The last one we lost money on, and we put our foot down. And hardly anybody adopted the program. And once again, the board said, you're fired. So the lesson on this, lesson number 4, is always test your market before you scale. I know that Starbucks does that when they bring out new stuff, but I just thought, hey, let's just go big or go home, which was not really the best thing to do. And finally, my last fail that I want to talk about is a search engine that we created to compete with Google. Bad idea. But anyway, the thought was that we would take pictures of every web page on the web. We would index them like Google indexes them. And then we would enable you, when you did a search, and if you put in 2 search words, within 100 milliseconds, we'd show you the top 10, but you could just flip through them and flip through them and flip through them. And you could drag and drop them, make a stack of them. Then you could put 10 web pages together and send them to somebody. And when you clicked on them, it just morphed into a web browser on that page. And so we ended up with 6 million, 7 million people using this thing. We raised $65 million. At the end, it was a $250 million pre-money valuation. And Microsoft came to us and offered a $200 million buyout. But the last people who put in at a $250 million said no. And it was 2007. And you know how rising money was in 2007? It wasn't so good. The company crashed and burned 18 months later. But while we were building that company, I was working from midnight to 3 in the morning writing, lesson number 5, sorry. High valuation is not a good thing. I was working from midnight to 3 in the morning writing the software for Funny or Die, which was a super fun thing. They did that first, I don't know if you saw it, the video of the little girl, and she's the landlord. When Nikki and I, my wife and I, saw that the first time, we're going like, this is either going to be really good or just horrible. And it took off, and when we took the password off and we didn't advertise it, and it was a destination site, 3 days later, we're getting 3 million video views a day. So it was crazy. So anyway, 5 lessons. Never lose control of your company. Don't depend on unproven platforms. Never sell your company to jerks. Sorry, Barry. Always test before you scale. And high valuations are not always good. 90% of startups fail, and they fail mostly because they run out of money before they get product market fit. So what I'm doing now, my wife and I own a company called C-Level Solutions. It's helping startups with tech, minimum viable product, product market fit, sales funnels, marketing plans, and fundraising. And if you click on this QR code, which is probably one on the table, you can go to our website and you can sign up, and we'll talk to you for free for half an hour and give you advice, and if there's some way we can help you in a long-term contract, we'll do it. But it's been a fun ride. Just want to thank you all for being here.
Wow, Randy. Wow. You totally blew my mind.
Oh, come on.
I want to click on that QR code and have a call for 30 minutes.
Go. Hey,
it will be completely irrelevant for you.
It doesn't matter. I get a lot of relevant calls every day.
I'll bet you do. I'll bet you do. So I love this framing of like failure being a really important tool. And I'm wondering, like, when along the way were you like, oh, failing is like giving me feedback and shaping my career? Like, when did you start to really adapt to it as like a function?
Well, I think you just have to kind of survive. And I don't think that I could do anything other than, well, I am doing stuff now, but I have to be in the startup world, and I probably will be, and I probably will be working with startups until they, put me in the ground. And so it just felt like, okay, that didn't work. Let's try something else. Let's try something else. Okay, that didn't work. And sometimes it didn't work because the timing wasn't right. Like, there's some ideas that I think that failed that will probably be very successful 5 years from now or 10 years from now. I mean, there's things like bandwidth limit things. When you're doing dial-up modems, you can't do video and things like that. And the AI is going to change everything. And the AI combined with like human-like avatars that you can't tell the difference if they're real or not is going to blow people's minds. And that's coming really quickly, and it's probably scary as heck, because it's sort of a combination of deep fake AI and chatbots that are they're real.
Well, thank you for those nightmares, Randy. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Questions from the audience? Aaron. Why Bend?
We went to Bend because my daughter lived in Bend, and she came here. Lives in Bend, and she came here before us. And we have 2 grandkids from her, and we thought we'd seen a lot of Bend and visiting, and we thought this place is a really cool place. I mean, people are nice. it's like the best of all worlds. And so until it closed down in COVID, and then it became like everything else. But Ben's special.
It is. I agree.
And we love it. We
Oh,
love it here.
well, it's really good to have you here. Yeah,
thank you.
it is a special place. We have a lot of good stuff going on. I know I have a question over here.
Yeah, I was curious, did you find an underwriting partner at Avenue?
Did you find an underwriting partner at Avenue?
Avenue, he's referring to a company started where I was a CTO and CIO of in Los Angeles that basically was doing insurance for autonomous vehicles. And the big problem we ran into is we decided that we were going to do a real insurance company, which means that you need underwriters and you can't just be like a broker. And we were trying to do a $50 million raise, and it didn't work. So no, we did not. They did pivot though after I departed, and I think they're doing technology for autonomous vehicles that assess risk.
Hey, we have a question in the theater.
We're ready for you.
If you were to invest in an emerging technology now, what would it be?
AI.
I thought you were going to say dating apps.
I have a client who has a dating app. It's interesting. He has a dating app that unites communities, and he has a dating app for Albanians and Albanians who moved to New York City, and it turns out you can create these vertical dating apps because if you have come from a culturally segregated in a sense cultural society, that you want to meet people that are also from that. And so yeah, he's I think I just helped him raise 4.6 million
Wow.
euros. So
That's
Hey,
wild.
Randy, can you be more specific on the AI? Like,
Be more
what
specific.
segment or industry or?
and AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be across all segments, to tell you the truth. I mean, it's certainly in medicine, right? There's going to be a lot of things that are coming out now based on trained systems that are neural net based. In the artificial intelligence sense, that in the whole e-commerce space, in the whole human interaction where half of it's not human. So it's in, neural net basically enables you to train models that if you give them inputs will predict the outcome. And if you think about that, that's what we do a lot. Like we think about, if you start this company and these are all your parameters, is it going to be successful? So whenever, the venture capital community now, bless their hearts, they do support a lot of things, but they're not right very much of the time, and consequently, the bigger firms have to have a unicorn, because they might get one or two companies that will make their fund and get their return, where 95% of the others some of them might be successful, 5%, but they won't make the fund. So I think this in detection of what makes a good business, there's certainly an intuitive sense, but I think at some point AI will surpass our intuition and our ability to figure out ourselves, and we can depend on it. Hopefully, it won't turn on us.
I'm wondering. God, Randy. Okay, I'm wondering, what do you do for fun? Like that's not work. That's not like all this wild stuff. What do you like? Do you go out for walks or?
My son, I like to ski, and a bachelor's so close. Although we've had some tough times this year weather-wise, but my son is my 13-year-old is at Seven Peaks, and they have every Friday their Wintermeister where you go, and so I go out with them and try to keep up with them. That's all. So I do that, and we have fun.
Oh, I love that. Good. I'm glad. Any other questions in the room? Any questions in the theater? Aaron, any questions from you? I mean, I'll ask questions all night. Truly, Randy, this has just been such an amazing pleasure. We're so lucky to have you here. I actually have a gift for you.
What?
This is our tradition. Okay, Randy, it's kind of a big deal. We have the PubTalk Stein. You can
Cool.
bring this back to a future PubTalk, and we will fill it for you.
So
It's-
McMenamins will fill this whenever
Yeah.
I'm here?
Well, I think, is it only during PubTalk, or will they? Yeah, they'll pretty much. I think for you, yes. I think absolutely they will.
That's my wife over there talking.
That's funny because I'm like, I have a feeling she's a good time. When you're just talking, I'm like, these people are fun. Thank you, Randy. It's such an honor.
Thank you.